Hello, BookTube. In honor of Nonfiction November, that massive BookTube event created by Olive at a Book Olive, I am devoting a huge amount of my reading time in November to nonfiction. Not a big burden on my part. I love nonfiction. I urge you all to give it a try. I think that if you do, you will start to notice, maybe even against your will, how threadbare and striving and a little bit hollow so much of the made-up stories is. You'll start to see that maybe there ought to be a large percentage of nonfiction mixed in with your reading. And in honor of Nonfiction November, Jordan Parsons and I are doing a read-along of Robert Sullivan's book, Rats. Got it here on the Kindle Paperwhite, which would seem like a natural choice because Jordan has rats as pets. In his latest video discussing the next batch of chapters that we're reading, one of his rats is playing, just roaming around on the shelves behind him, and then it spends 30 seconds thinking, oh, I want to get down from here, and I don't see an easy way, and then thinks, oh, right, there's the human, and just hops onto Jordan's head. I can't help but think there were people watching his video. I'll leave a link to it down below. I think there were some of you watching that just going, But I have met so-called fancy rats. I've met domesticated pet rats, rats that have never experienced any of the trials or the stress of their environment that all the rats experience in Sullivan's book, and that have also never experienced the endless horrors that humankind visits on them in laboratories and military facilities every single day of every single year, including now. I guarantee you, no matter where you're watching this video, you are fewer than 100 miles away from a facility in which scientists are intentionally giving cancer and other painful, horrifying ailments to rats, who are sentient beings who understand when something's wrong with their body and don't like it any more than you do. Staggers me. I can only imagine what Jordan thinks of it. But and the reason that my thoughts are along those lines is because you can't avoid it in this book. As I mentioned last time, any natural history like this of an animal that has had an adversarial relationship with humankind is going to be a book largely about humans killing them and all the different ways that they have and the begrudging laws that have been enacted to try to stop them. It'll be that way whether you're dealing with a book on the American bison or on whales. Oh my God, most whale books before the 21st century were The Promise of Whales, The Beauty of Whales, Whales and Men. That's what the titles would be like. The books were just an unremitting catalog of slaughters. Same thing is true with the wolf. To move from Jordan's bailiwick to my own, there have been many, many books on wolves in the last 10, 15, 30, 40 years that are all about the systemic torture campaigns that were conducted on wolves. Wolves in the lower 48 in the United States were not simply exterminated, hunted to extermination or just about. They were also grotesquely tortured. The extinguishing them wasn't enough for the men who did it. Instead, they were wounded, mortally wounded, and then tortured in ways that are too graphic and too horrifying for me to recite on this channel. But obviously mentally damaged to do. Not a question of a farmer thinking, well, if I don't kill these wolves, they will kill my livestock. No, no, no. No, no, no. The details go well, well beyond that into some kind of mania. And a lot of the stories that Sullivan reports in this book also reflect that kind of a mania, where the humans involved are motivated by rage in addition to practicality. I don't know what explains that. I really don't. But I've met rats like Jordan's at the homes of people that I've known, and there's a tiny amount, an instantaneous amount of caution, because we've all been raised from the cradle to think that rats are carriers of disease, which they can be, disease elevators, as they're referred to in this book. But once that was over, once I realized, no, this is a perfectly healthy, happy rat who is not furtive, is not going to bite anything, is perfectly curious and interested, then I got to know them, and it's a wonderful. They're wonderful people. They would rank highly in Steve's list of the top 10 species on Earth. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it's both at the same time. The chapters that we're reading today of this book are more of that catalog of woes. Sullivan himself sets up post in what I would imagine is a fictitious alley and gives us stories about the rats that he sees, the rats, what they do, how they seem to notice each other, whether or not they know each other, how they map their surroundings, how they move, how they eat, how the locals react to them. We get more and more of those stories intermixed with the history of rats in Manhattan and the various campaigns that have been made to exterminate them and the various times when they have swelled beyond all reckoning. I remember very vividly the last very major trash collection strike in Manhattan, where trash collectors went on strike. I very vividly remember that. I remember what happened to the rat population. And I went through something very similar to that here in Boston later than that, when we had a massive construction project. It was gigantic. It was something called the Big Dig. It's in the history books now, but I lived through it. Every single minute of it, I lived through it. There was a massive elevated highway that ran through my old stomping ground. A whole neighborhood was seized and leveled, so that this ugly eyesore of an elevated highway could be run through. And after a little while, city planners realized, well, if that doesn't come down, then it goes from being a route of commerce through the city to being a noose around the city's neck. It has to come down, or the city can't expand. So that needs to happen. Imagine the nightmare of that. Imagine the nightmare of planning to pull down and then depress that artery, because that artery wasn't canceled. It went underneath the city. Imagine trying to do all that while also having 2.7 million people commuting into the city to work every day. You can't tell them to stay away. That work all had to happen, and it was a nightmare, a logistical miracle, but also a logistical nightmare. And one of the first things it did was displace a huge population of rats. Everybody in all of Boston, all of the neighborhoods in Boston, simultaneously started reporting rats everywhere where they hadn't seen any before. I saw that many, many, many times. I saw that. I had a friend let me into Boston Garden, what was the name for, I think it's called TD Bank or something like that now, because we have slogans on everything. But once upon a time, the old Boston Garden was where all of the sporting events were held. That's where the Boston Bruins played. That's where the Boston Celtics played. And I had a friend let me in late at night. He was actually there to do business late at night. We went in and he said, here, I've got a site to show you. And we walked through the bowels of the place to a skybox overlooking the vast amphitheater of Boston Garden itself, the central amphitheater where the games would be played, where the parquet was laid for the Celtics, where the Zamboni smoothed out the ice for the Bruins. But this was late at night. There hadn't been an event that day. And I said, well, so you're going to show me an auditorium full of empty seats? And he said, not exactly. And he switched on the lights. And the amphitheater was absolutely swarming with rats. There were so many of them on the floor space, the gigantic floor space, that you almost couldn't see the floor. And they were all over the seats. They were just everywhere. It was a mind-boggling experience to think. Although my first thought was, well, okay, there's a game tomorrow night. I wonder how many people going there don't have any idea that this is what it looked like the night before. And my friend said that this is caused by the Big Dig. This used to happen, but not like this. Not a sea of rats. I encountered them myself many times on Boston Common after dark, where I had never encountered them before. And, those rats were furtive, and they were prone to collective action. They were prone to mobbing, and they weren't particularly timid. And again, I want to stress the point I made last time, which is that a large number of those attributes are caused by stress. You can find equivalent studies of humans in basically low-income, poverty-stricken, desolate areas. They also act like animals under stress. It doesn't show them in their best light. And the rats that I saw in those circumstances always looked like they were dangerous. It looked like, not only was that an amazing sight to see the floor of Boston Garden just swarming with rats, but you also got the strong impression that if you went down there, you would just be eaten to the bone. They wouldn't flee. They'd have a courage in aggregate. These are bloodthirsty stories, I know, but that's what comes through in this book, in these chapters. That's what comes through. This was Sullivan's own decision. It was his decision to study these animals in a place where they're not behaving completely naturally. And that's what you get. But I noticed once again, I'm going to try not to fly off the handle here. I noticed once again that my video has become virtually unwatchable because of the light. I don't know where else to go. I honestly don't know what else to do here. I'm not going to hang funeral curtains over every window here. I value the light. But I don't remember it being this kind of a problem before, where I'm not free to make any video without the light doing this or something worse. So I'm going to wrap up this video. It's been a great deal of fun so far. We still have a little more of this book to read and maybe a little treat for you. I was interested to see in Jordan's video that he confirmed in his dialogue the conversation of something that I had suspected but had not 100% known, which is the rat community. I know there are communities for everybody, for everything. And he made mention, an offhand mention, of the rat community in his latest videos. I'd love to be involved in the rat community, find out what these people, what their stories are. But well, that might come up later this month. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up and disappear into the sunlight like St. Teresa of Avila. Thank you, BookTube, and God bless.